Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Hello, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the Business of Winning podcast. This is the second episode in our new series. I hope you caught last week's first episode, which was a great conversation with former McLaren World Championship winning mechanic Mark Priestley, now, of course, widely recognized and respected author, broadcaster, corporate speaker, a great guy to talk to about his career. And if you didn't catch that episode, I think you'll enjoy hearing about his new book, Pit Lane Lessons. And Mark, definitely one of the more inspirational guys that you could wish to meet. This week, we're talking to someone with a formidable career in Formula One, and that is the Polish engineer, Marcin Budkowski. All I will say is if you're going to make a tick list of people you would want to have worked with or for over the last 30 years, Marcin's done a pretty good job. He started his career working with Alain Prost, progressed to Ferrari in the era of Michael Schumacher, then McLaren under Ron Dennis, then the FIA deputizing or being deputy to Charlie Whiting, and then finally a really senior role at the Renault and subsequently Alpine Formula One team at Enstone. So I hope you really enjoy the conversation I had with Marcin. He's a great guy, really interesting to speak to, and some really interesting insights on his learnings along the way in Formula One. Enjoy. Marcin, first of all, very nice to have you here. We're recording this podcast a couple of days after a very interesting Brazilian Grand Prix. What did you think of the latest episode of Formula One 2025?
We're getting a much more interesting season than we thought we would be getting, certainly at the beginning. And it's twists and turns at every race. So this was one more of an exciting race. I must say, there's two things. I'm a little bit sad for Oscar. You know, I know Oscar quite well from he was part of our junior team.
Yeah.
Our young driver academy at Renault and at Alpine. So I have a sweet spot for him. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a very talented driver. I think he really made a step this season, and I thought he would finish the job, and he's struggling too for reasons that are not completely clear, probably partly technical and maybe partly psychological.
Yeah.
But I must say I'm incredibly impressed by Max, who is for me the best driver in Formula One at the moment, and he shows it week in, week out. Who would have thought that he would make a comeback like this, and I think he still has a chance, and it shows that he can never write Max Verstappen off.
Yeah, isn't it great, for people like you and me as well, involved in racing all our lives, when you see a driver who becomes at one with the machine and is in total command of what he's doing. And you can see that with Max. It's just an incredible, almost symbiotic relationship between him and the car, and he's able to drive. It looks like he's on a different level.
Yeah, it looks he's on a different level. So, we remember the race last year in Brazil where he looks like he was the only one driving an F2 car. But I'm also amazed by how few mistakes he makes. It's very, very rare to see him make a mistake, and even in situations where he makes a mistake or the team under delivers, he is there to get 100% and more than 100% from the car and from the possibilities of the race, and that's simply incredible to watch. So I think we are maybe got used to it a little bit during the Red Bull domination years, but I'm sure in a few years' time, or a few decades' time, we'll look at this period as one of the most extraordinary of motorsport, as we do now with the Senna period or the Prost period or the Clark period, or all these great champions.
Now, we're not really supposed to be just talking about the Brazilian Grand Prix, but on a very appropriate topic, because we're going to talk about your career journey, including the time that you spent with the FIA. And of course, one of the big stories at the weekend in Brazil was completely related to the work the FIA has done for the last 30 years on safety and the Gabriel Bortoleto accident. And I mean, the fans who see that accident on TV are shocked. And of course, the media are shocked. But you're an engineer. And so you know what's involved in the detail of an accident like that, and how incredible it is that that guy is able to quite literally walk away from it. It's a real testimony to 3 decades of hard work by engineers, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. And I think we often talk about the safety improvements on the cars, but we don't often talk about the safety improvements on the circuits as well, and all the work that's been done with the barriers in general, and all the absorption system, and the work that's been done in making sure circuit configurations are done in a way that make these kind of accidents have very little consequence. And I think it's the combination of the two. Obviously, the biggest progress has been done in the cars. Anyone who goes and see an old car, whether it's at a Goodwood or an event or something, an old Formula One car, would probably be scared of sitting in it, just even to do slow laps in it, because it just feels incredibly raw and unsafe. The cars of today are very, very different. We're very fortunate to see very, very few accidents with consequences. But yeah, it was, the crashes that are the most dangerous are the crashes that are, freak accidents, if you want. And Bortoletto's was one of these. It's not, a driver braking too hard or getting involved in touching another car in the braking zone or in a corner, because these things are incredibly well covered with the circuit design and the car design. It's when a car, gets out of shape, out of control in because of a mechanical failure, because of a freak incident, because of something happening that is not typical, and then ends up impacting either, at an angle which is very unusual, or in a place where nobody expects a car to hit the wall. And in a way, Gabriel's was one of these accidents, but it was good to see that everything worked as it should have worked. And the reality is, had the car been repairable, he probably would have competed in a qualifying session in the afternoon, which is truly incredible.
Which is incredible. Now, let's take a big step back in time to your beginnings, Marcin, because you're Polish, and indeed you're recording today's episode from Warsaw. Talk to me about your background, and how, for you as a young man growing up in Poland, Formula One became the thing that you then decided to come into. What's your backstory in regards to your journey into Formula One?
I'm born in Poland, but my family moved to France when I was a kid, when I was 5 years old. And I think without that, I probably wouldn't have ended up in Formula One, because Formula One wasn't popular at all in Poland. Was barely shown on TV. It was actually very difficult to watch races when I was coming back from France to Poland and wanted to watch a race. Either it wasn't shown at all, or they would show the start and they would switch to some TV series and sitcoms, and that shows how unpopular it was. It did change quite a lot with Robert Kubica, of course, because in every country, when you have your national hero in competing in a sport, then the public takes much bigger interest, but also now, because of the growing popularity of Formula One. But he was popular in France. Car racing was popular, and Formula One obviously was popular. Plus, when I discovered Formula One, it was in the late 80s. It was at the peak of Alain Prost's career. And the period of the Prost Senna rivalry. So it was a perfect timing, because obviously in France, Alain was very, very popular, and Formula One was very exciting to watch at the time. So I started watching it just because my parents were watching it occasionally on Sundays, and it was almost an instant kind of click. I became extremely passionate about it. I started watching all the races, getting up at 4 a.m. to watch the overseas races. buying all the magazines and collecting them, and it became a passion. And later on, while I was studying and deciding what path to give to my career, then my why not try to make turn your passion into a career? And I was extremely lucky to be able to do that. I chose engineering just because I was good at school, and I was good in math and physics and various kind of scientific disciplines, and so I actually built my path, if you want, my studies around the dream of working in Formula One, and it wasn't easy, it wasn't straightforward, because Formula One is not an easy word to get into, and there's a lot of people who are keen on working in Formula One, and few make it. But I was lucky to be in the right time in the right place, and got into F1.
Now, you studied aerodynamics, you're an aerodynamicist, and you studied in Paris and London. But listening to you talking about your childhood and getting interested in Formula One, living in France in the late 1980s, it must have been incredible for you to get an opportunity to work with Alain Prost's team when you came into the sport. That must have felt like quite a special moment. I know the team was probably already suffering some difficulties, but for you as a young engineer coming out of academic world into Formula One, working at Prost Grand Prix must have been a nice opportunity.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity, but to be honest, it was also the only opportunity I had. So, I wrote. It's a funny story because I did my last year of studies at Imperial College in London as an exchange student, for the reason that most teams were British, and I thought my biggest chances of working Formula One are working for a British team, or at least to have a British degree, which was very recognised in within British teams and British engineers in general. Because let's remember that at the time, Ferrari or even Prost were full with British engineers in the top positions. So I did my last year at Imperial. I since I bought this little book, Who Works in Formula One, and religiously sent CVs to all the technical directors, all the head of aeros, all the head of HRs, and etc. That all got spammed. And at the time, you would send emails, you would send letters. I would write nice motivation letters with my CV to all these people. Most of them didn't reply. The ones that replied no, and one person replied yes, and he wasn't even at Prost. It was Henri Durand, who was head of aero at McLaren, who happened to just be leaving McLaren and to become Prost technical director. And he was keen on hiring new blood, new young talented engineers, and that's how I ended up at Prost Grand Prix, which was funny because I was a fan of Alain Prost when growing up, because it was difficult not to when you grew up in France. It didn't last for very long because I worked there for 10 months, and then the team went to bankruptcy. But it was a very enjoyable first experience, and it was my foot in the door.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. And we're going to talk a little bit about your own leadership experience later on in the podcast. But I was at Jordan Grand Prix at the time when you were with Prost, and I remember we looked at Alain's team almost like being, if you like, a French version of Jordan. It was an independent team. It was Alain's dream, and of course, all of us were very impressed to see this world champion driver have a team. Looking back on that experience and knowing what you know now, how do you regard the failure of Prost at a Grand Prix? Because it was, I know, a very difficult personal moment for Alain Prost to accept that his team, his French team, he was so proud of that, wasn't able to sustain itself in Formula One. But it was a very brutal environment, wasn't it? And leadership of a Formula One team is really incredibly challenging, especially back in those days where you needed a high degree of entrepreneurship to attract the finance and the sponsorship.
I think it was very exciting project. I think at the time Alain overestimated a little bit the traction, the momentum he could get around his name in France. I think he believed he would get more support. He built it as a team with a French identity. You know, the cars were blue. The team was located in France, next to Paris, which is, as we know, unusual for Formula One team, and far away from the birth of the kind of motorsport valley in the UK or Italy, where most of the suppliers are. So there were difficulties in the logistics of that. The team was Ligier. He was initially based next to Manicourt. He was moved next to Paris in a small but fancy factory, at least at the time. Factories got much fancier since and much bigger. But the wind tunnel was still in Manicourt next to the circuit. So there was some difficulties around that, but he really wanted to give that team this French identity and obviously use his name to carry it and to be be impactful and create some momentum. And that didn't really work. The French big companies weren't that interested. He was hoping for a bit more, probably governmental support or regional support to make it happen. He had some, and that momentum waned, and the results were, decent, but then they were not exceptional. The Peugeot engine that we had at the time wasn't anything special, to say the least, or to be politically correct. We moved to the Ferrari engine in the last year and had a step in performance, but it was probably too late. We could record a whole episode about it. All I can say is that team was, we're building a new car for the 2002 season. The numbers were actually really good in the tunnel. Now everybody says that in the winter, that's but it looked really good, and there was a fight to survive until the very end. And but it was a small team. It was 200 people, 220 people. Even at the time, it was a small Formula One team, very united, very very good, team spirit, and people worked until the last minute. The team was in bankruptcy. There was a court, deciding whether one of the buyers was good enough and whether the money was clean enough, because we're still talking about times in Formula One where not all the money was crystal clean, and there was still some dodgy money involved. But and I think we all fought to the last minute. And I remember the day where we're all in the office working on a new car, and we got a phone call, and someone said it's over. And I think it was like 4 p.m. And people were in shock. And I think we stayed together until like 8 or 9 or 10 p.m. in the design office. All the people kind of regrouped in the design office, and nobody could believe it, and nobody could leave. It was almost like it took us a few hours to realize it was over. And interestingly, we're not talking about Ferrari and a huge kind of Italian, fan base and etc. We're talking about a team that wasn't the French national team or anything. But when we left the factory, there were people outside waiting and clapping and waving flags and etc. There weren't thousands, as you would see at Ferrari. There was 50 people or something waiting there and clapping, and it just shows that there were people who were hardcore supporters of the project, and I was it was an emotional day. It was very very sad.
Yeah, listening to you talking about that, it really demonstrates the fact that no matter what team you're in, whether it's a big team or a small team, you build a camaraderie, you build the teamwork, and it starts to feel quite special. And it is very difficult when or if that comes to an end. And fortunately now in Formula One, we have much greater stability for all the teams. But turning to your journey, you then went from this dream of Alain Prost's, which turned into, a little bit of a nightmare for him personally, and ended the team. And you went from there to Maranello, and you're now joining a team, Ferrari, which many of us now look back and see that as a super team of the modern era in Formula One. You joined them in 2002. This is a kind of golden era of Ferrari, where you have Jean Todt as chief executive, you have Ross Brawn as technical director, you have Michael Schumacher, of course, leading the team on track. that must have been quite an experience for you to step into that environment, to go to what was then essentially the biggest team in Formula One, and of course a dominant team in Formula One. Talk to us about that, and maybe how you reflect on that golden era. What was it that made the Scuderia Ferrari of that time just such a formidable and dominant team?
So just before I answer your question, I'll tell you a quick funny anecdote. I actually turned Ferrari's offer down initially and decided to go to Jordan, so we could have worked together, Mark, at the time. Because Henri Durand, who got me into Prost, went to
Yeah,
Jordan.
Henri came.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, I
Gary
remember Henri coming. Yeah.
and I had this loyalty to him that because he gave me my chance to Formula One and in Formula One, and he wanted me to follow him to Jordan, then I would do it. So I initially turned down Ferrari's offer, which triggered a funny thing because I was 23 years old and I was a very young engineer with 1 year experience. I started getting calls from Jean Todt and Ross Brawn to convince me to come to Ferrari, which was very flattering at the time, a bit scary at times. But it means that when I arrived at Ferrari, I had this image of someone who turned down Ferrari while they were winning everything, and who is this crazy guy who didn't want to come and ended up coming. But anyway, it was the right decision, with all the respect to Jordan and to what you guys were doing, because as I said, I joined what today is still, I think, seen as the dream team of Formula One. It was an incredible winning machine. You mentioned a few names, but I will add a few because it's interesting how when you look around the F1 paddock today, the key people, Stefano Domenicali was the sporting director. There was Mattia Binotto in the engine department, being actually the engine engineer for trackside activities. I was working with James Allison in the area department, and my boss was Nick Tombazis. So for the people who know their way around Formula One, and that's just to name a few. And there's more names like this that could be mentioned. But when you look at who are the movers and shakers and the key people in Formula One today, a lot of them are coming from this team and from this period. It was a shock for me. I was coming from a small team, 200 people, very little budget, especially towards the end. I mean, we were not paying our suppliers. We were struggling to get parts delivered at Prost. We ended up, using all reports printed on one side and put it in a printer the other way around when we needed to print something, because there was no paper in the printer. So that's Formula One and the in a dying team. And then I arrived at Ferrari, and then it was a team with big budget. It was a big team, a winning team, obviously with huge history. When you arrive at Maranello, and you can feel that history when you go for dinner at Cavallino or Montana, or you grab your coffee, in front of the old gate, the factory. There's a lot of history. It's something very kind of sobering, and something very humbling about being there. But the other thing that shocked me is, these guys were winning in and out, most weekends. And at Prost, when, at the time the points were only for the top six. And when we were scoring a sixth position, a fifth position, we all meet in a pub near Versailles and celebrate the point, the 2 points. And then I remember a week or two after I arrived, we win a race, and I walk in the office in that Ferrari in the morning, and everybody's sat in front of their laptops, working. I'm like, the guys just won a race, and they're like, yeah, well, that's a Sunday for us, but it was still, even with that, it's not that they were lacking motivation or anything. It was just, suddenly I was part of a winning team, and winning was, part of the life of the team, and everybody was focused on we want to keep winning rather than win the odd race and celebrate. But yeah, it was a very well structured team. Jean was amazing. Jean Todt for filtering. He was a relentless worker, incredible work ethic, and so he was kind of extremely demanding. with himself and with everybody. So he was kind of setting the culture, if you want, in the team, and also filtering us a little bit from Luca de Montezemolo and from the kind of influence that it was a bit more emotional, etc. And Jean was very cold and calculated, and then Ross was there as a figure. Ross was technical director, but actually he wasn't very involved in the day-to-day technical design of the car. That was Rory Byrne's area, and Rory was a fantastic engineer, but Ross was extremely good at cutting through the politics, and really getting everybody to look at in the same direction, and avoiding any finger pointing, any blaming, which was a little bit the case before in the Ferrari culture, and may I say in the Italian culture there was an aspect of that, and that culture of fear and of finger pointing was completely removed. And people were all working in the same direction, and it was quite impressive to see. Obviously, I went from a very small team to the most dominant team, so it was a big step. And I only later could I see other models of teams, but it was very healthy in terms of how the management running the team, how cohesive it was, and how little politics there was. And obviously, Michael was there as a leader of the team from the driver's side, with this incredible talent, respected by everybody, but also with a human side that a lot of people neglect. He was actually a very nice guy. He was spending time in the factory. He was spending time to say hi to everybody. And people respected him for his talent skills, but also for the person he was. And he really created this dynamic where everybody wanted to work for him, and build a car for him to win races.
The summary you have just given of your experience of Ferrari is also worth an entire episode of a podcast, because you talked about so many things in that one answer. You talk about the work ethic of Jean Todt, the leader of the company, very demanding, but very visible in his leadership. And also Michael, very visible in his leadership coming to the factory. And then you talk about, all the different individuals who were in that team. You mentioned a few more names, and you're right. The team is not made up of a driver, a team principal. It's made up of hundreds and now thousands of people who make it all happen. But there's a couple of points that I just want to come back to you on about Ferrari. One is actually the last point that you made, which is about the elimination of blame culture. Because you mentioned Mattia Binotto, and as you know, he became team principal, and he gave an interview to the BBC. I think it was 3 years ago now, and I remember reading this interview. It was around the time of the British Grand Prix, and he told Andrew Benson that Ferrari's problem was cultural, and I thought it was a very honest, very brave interview where he was being open, and he said, we have a little bit of a tendency towards blame, and we have to eradicate that because it's stopping us innovating, it's stopping us taking risks, it's stopping us having courage to do things. And my perception is that Ferrari's default is this blame culture. And with it, I mean, we're not here to criticize Ferrari, but again, they've just had a difficult weekend in Brazil. But there's no denying that one of the backstories of Formula One for the last 20 years has been Ferrari not winning the championship. And I just wonder what your view is on the importance of a culture where you have everyone feeling safe and avoiding blame and eradicating pointing the fingers, just learning and moving forward. I'm interested in your thoughts around the cultural aspect of a Formula One team.
I'll give you a little anecdote if you want. When Luca de Meo took over Renault group, and decided to keep the Renault team alive, and transition its branding to Alpine, if you want, to create this story around this French Porsche as he wanted to create it. Luca was a very bright, is a very bright guy, very visionary, extremely good in marketing. He's unfortunately he's a motorsport fan, so which is the worst boss to have, on above you, if you want, because they're extremely interested and they're extremely excited by it, so they want to get involved, and I think they know because they they follow it, but unfortunately they don't, because it's a different, it's a different job and it's a different environment. But anyway, Luca, one of the first kind of meetings or lunches I had with him, he with the kind of top management of the Renault and then Alpine team at the time. I remember he said in a meeting, "I don't want to see a Renault engine failing in the race ever anymore from today." And there was a silence in the room, and I looked at Luca and I said, "Okay, Luca, that's we can do that." Obviously, it wasn't my side of the business. I was running Enstone and not Theory, but the same could have applied to I never want to see a car breakdown, from any kind of mechanical failure on the chassis side. And I said to him, "That's a very laudable objective, but then are you ready to accept that the car is going to be slow?" And he looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, what do you mean? I'm not saying I want a slow car. I want a fast car and a reliable car." And I said, "But to do that, you're going to have to take an amount of risk. And when you take risk, you're going to accept that sometimes you're going to fail. And then, if I'm an engineer and I'm told your part can't fail, let's say I'm a structure engineer, very I think it's one of the I wouldn't say the worst jobs, because all due respect was for structural engineers, they're very clever people. But when you're a structural engineer, when your part doesn't break, you do a normal job. When your part breaks, you do a bad job. So it's not a very high reward job. But if you're a structural engineer and you're told there's no way your part can break, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to add some margin everywhere, some safety margin. Safety margin is weight. Is you're going to design a bigger part, you're going to design a heavy part, because if the part fails, you're fired. If the part doesn't fail, great, you've done a good job. Now imagine throughout an organization of 800 people, as Enstone was at the time, 1,000 people, 100, 2,000 people, 1,200 people, like the bigger teams are. If everybody in the organization takes a little bit of margin of everything they do because they're scared of failing, you're going to have a reliable car, but it's going to be overweight and it's going to be slow. And the reality is, everyone in the organization, coming back to your question, the blame culture at Ferrari and the risk taking, everybody in the organization has to make their best effort to place the cursor between risk and performance in the best possible way. And obviously, it's unreasonable to expect this from a young engineer, because they don't have the experience. They haven't seen many failures. They haven't, so that's where the levels of experience in the organization are very useful to assess the risk, to guide them, to teach them. But eventually, everybody has to take an amount of risk in what they do, whether it's you're a structural engineer, whether you're a strategist, whether you're, a tire engineer, whether you're a driver, at the end of the day, in what you do. And that combination is what's going to make you fast or fail, and this is where the kind of collective know-how of an organization helps to gauge that risk and to make all these micro decisions at all the stages of design, production, and operation of a car, which is you're gonna hit the right spot. But if you tell someone, if you make a mistake, you're going to lose your job or you're getting demoted, then you're going to end up with a slow car, and you're going to end up with a team that doesn't work cohesively, because what's going to happen? Some engineer is going to want to take a risk, and the guy above him, who's a middle manager, is going to say, whoa, 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 no, because if you make a mistake, I'm going to get blamed. So like the safety margins pile up, and it doesn't work. So it's a very it's simple and not simple at the same time. The concept is simple. The realization of it is incredibly complex, because it needs to happen at all the levels of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating to hear you talking about that, because I think in sport we love to hear about marginal gains, but you've just been talking about marginal marginal reduction in preparedness to take risks. So everyone's just doing a little bit less than is optimal, and it all adds up to ultimately not having a competitive advantage. Can we talk a little bit about the next phase of your career? Because you went you went from Ferrari to McLaren, and McLaren in 2007 was a very different beast than it is today. It was still under the leadership of Ron Dennis and Martin Whitmarsh. If you just talk very briefly about that period, about your experience at McLaren, because I want to then talk to you about your next move, which is to jumping the fence into the FIA and moving to work with the regulator. But just initially, talk to me a little bit about your experience at McLaren and how you found that after your time at Ferrari.
I was up for a change, and from life in Italy, from Ferrari, where I had been for almost 6 years. Funnily, I resigned from Ferrari to go to McLaren weeks before the Spygate kind of popped up between Ferrari and McLaren, which means I didn't know if I would have a job, because I didn't know if McLaren would still be racing in Formula One in the next season. I had a few months of gardening leave, and I was a little bit. And Ferrari tried to keep me, telling me you can't go to the bad guys. Look at what they've done. But I ended up going to McLaren. It was a very interesting time. I'll to keep it short, I'll tell you one thing: the level of engineering at McLaren was incredible. And even if Ferrari was the winning team, the level of engineering at McLaren was incredible. And I remember having the discussion a few months after I arrived with Jonathan Neal, saying, I don't understand why you guys are not winning every race and every championship, because you have like an amount of engineers who are incredibly bright, incredibly good. The reality is, I think it was an engineering company, not really a racing team. And again, that could be elaborated for another episode. But the culture was very much around engineering and around excellence and developing the brightest solution and the best solutions, and not enough about just going racing, and getting a car on the track that is as quick as possible. And I think that was the culture of McLaren. But as an engineer, I've learned a lot at McLaren, a lot more probably than I had learned at Prost and at Ferrari. In terms of management, in many aspects, I probably learned what not to do at McLaren in many aspects as well, because it was, although it seemed very polished and very organized from the outside, it was actually quite messy on the inside.
Again, you're right. We could have another podcast, probably just to discuss some of those individual experiences, because I find it fascinating to look at how teams in Formula One perform. Either why some teams are winning and sustaining success, and why some teams struggle to achieve success, and all the human factors involved and the organizational factors involved in that. Let's talk about the FIA. Why did you decide to go to the FIA when you did? Because there are not that many people in Formula One who have gone from technical roles in a team to the FIA. It's more common these days than it used to be in the past. But talk to me about the reason why you did that, and then that experience of working for the regulator and becoming the gatekeeper, if you like. So very interested to hear about that, Marcin.
Yeah, so I left McLaren because I ended up being in conflict with the management. Long story short, I was head of aerodynamics. The choices that had been made by the chief engineer, backed by the technical director for the car in 2014, I disagreed with. The car was pretty slow, so I could say that I had a good intuition there, but I disagree with, and we ended up in a difficult situation where at the end of the day I was put aside provisionally, and I decided to leave. So it was an unpleasant end to a very fruitful collaboration for 7 years. I think I got promoted like 5 times in 7 years when I was there. So it was a good career evolution. But at the end of the day, it came to a clash, and I just preferred to walk. And at the time, I decided to take a bit of a a bit of thinking time about what next to do in my career, and I had this feeling that even if I was head of aerodynamics and I could have progressed maybe to a chief engineer or a technical director role or something like this, engineering wasn't something I wanted to do all my life. That I felt that I wanted to have a wider scope and discover other aspects of the sport, whether it was in Formula One or elsewhere. So I decided to take a little break and consider what to do next. And while I was having this break, I got put in touch with the technical director of the FIA, Bernard Niclot, who was working on different projects. And long story short, I ended up going there for a few months for a quick project to help Bernard as part of as leading a task force for the FIA. On exploring connectivity and all these kind of new technologies, connected cars and things like this, and how it could be applied to motorsport, which I thought was an interesting topic, and I was kind of interesting to discover a little bit the FIA and how it worked. And that really nice office, Place de la Concorde in Paris, where my parents live. So it was just a nice change from being in rural England or rural Italy, and I did a few months there. I did this task force, which then I compiled a nice report and presented to Jean Todt, and Jean was very very happy with it. And obviously Jean I knew from the Ferrari days, so we were close from these days. And then out of the blue, I wasn't quite expecting it. I got one day invited for a little chat by the head of HR of the FIA, who said that they were starting to look for a successor to Charlie Whiting, but actually they realized they probably already had it in house, and they thought I would be great for the job, and I wasn't really expecting it. Obviously, Charlie was this huge figure and extremely respected in Formula One. And it's the proposal that was difficult to say no to, and it wasn't quite clear when he would retire or how, etc. But the objective for me was to work as a right hand man to Charlie, and to progressively build my knowledge and experience to succeed him. Little top, I accepted that offer, moved to Geneva, to the FIA offices there. Discovered that, little did I know, a few months later, that Charlie had absolutely no intention to retire whatsoever. He didn't mention it in passing in a conversation with Jean Todt, just to pacify Jean a little bit, because Jean had this didn't completely trust Charlie or Herbie for that matter, because he thought their loyalty was a bit confused and they were a little bit too close to Byrne. For comfort, so he always wanted to have one of his men in the seat, but knew that Charlie was a very difficult man to replace. Not only because he was very competent and obviously hugely experienced and respected at what he did, but also because he had set up a system where he had absolutely no one who could take over. So they wanted to break that system a little bit, and it was fascinating, and it was great to work with Charlie, and huge respect for Charlie, and I think we had mutual respect for each other. But there was always a little defiance from Charlie. It's very complicated because he could see how it could be helpful to him in some areas, but he equally didn't want me to learn too quickly or develop my network too quickly, because he didn't want to be in a position to be replaced. And that, fast forward a few years, led to me eventually leaving the FIA because I realized that I would probably spend years there before Charlie retired. I had no intention, I've never been someone who stabs people in the back, and I had no intention to try to push Charlie out, because I had too much respect. But equally, I felt that I was going to spend half of my life at the FIA. Waiting for Charlie to retire, and knowing Charlie, he'd probably still be in the race director seat now if his health hadn't failed him before.
Now, you went from the FIA to Renault Alpine. Again, we could probably do another whole podcast about that experience. Just talk to me, perhaps in overall terms, about the Renault and Alpine experience for you. And also, I have a very straight question to ask. What has been the problem at Renault Alpine? Because I'm an Alpine. I own an Alpine. I love Alpine. I love the road car product. I think they've done a great job there. I would love to see the Formula One team competing at the front. What's preventing them doing that? really a two-part question: your experience there, and then your views on what is holding Enstone back from being the front runner.
So I joined. It was I signed my contract. I think it was 2017, and I joined early 2018. It was in the very early phases of the rebuilding of the team, and I felt it was an ambitious project. It was a great opportunity to be in the top management of a team. To the role was to run Enstone effectively, which is the UK the F1 team when with the French base being in France and still overseen by Cyril Abitboul directly, and obviously the whole Renault F1 and motorsport operation was overseen by Cyril. So I was his kind of right hand man and running the Enstone team. Um, it was very ambitious, and when I joined, progressively I realized that the ambition was very much there, but the financial commitment from Renault wasn't, and it was because it was financing the team, but it wasn't financing it to a level that would allow it to be a top team, let alone to catch up on the top teams, because you often have to, it's like investing, you have to put more money up front if you want to reap the rewards later. And that's what I call the original sin in that project. Is the original sin is that Cyril and Jérôme Stoll, who was the president of Renault Sport, in good faith, I must say, sold the project, the F1 project, to Carlos Ghosn, based on a certain level of financial involvement from the Renault Group, which was actually accurate at the time of sale, of the time when they convinced Carlos Ghosn to go, but they vastly underestimated the increase in the costs in Formula One, the escalation of the costs, because the top teams were in a fight for performance. And at the time, it was before the introduction of the cost cap. Money bought you performance. It's not a necessarily direct relationship, but by spending more money, you could recruit more people. You could have a better infrastructure. You could get parts quicker. You could there's a lot of things you could do with money at the time. And the inflation in the costs of winning in Formula One was huge, while the actual Renault budget was stable. And instead of catching up, we were struggling. And I made that point, to Jerome and to Cyril, and even to Carlos Ghosn in some way in a board meeting of the team at the Renault headquarters. But Carlos Ghosn didn't want to hear about this, and the answer I got from the time from Cyril and Jerome was, you have to win with 15% less money than the others, and and that sounds amazing, and it could probably apply to a lot of industries, but unfortunately in Formula One it's very, very difficult, and so it was like playing with a hand tied in your back, and we were constantly fighting with revised budgets and budget cuts, because Renault Group was had bad results, so we had to give some money back and things like this. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to make it just a money issue. I think there's a lot of things in the team that had to be changed. There's a lot of cultural changes that needed to be done in Enstone, and I was doing while I was there. There's some people, some structural issues, and etc. So there was a lot of issues, but the original sin was the team wasn't financed to the level of the ambitions, and the ambitions were ever growing. The money wasn't, and that put us at this very difficult dynamic where people were built expectations, and even in our communication, and it was very difficult for me at this stage, because I was one of the spokesperson of the team, and increasingly, obviously, with the Alpine take over, my level of responsibility increased, and I was the kind of front-facing person in the media. I had to stick to a company discourse, which was, we will win, we will make podiums, we'll win races, we'll win championships by this year and that year, and so on. Well, actually, deep down, I knew that wasn't realistic with what we had, and and increasingly, you talk to your people in the factory, and your people are very sensitive to authenticity. They kind of see if you're authentic, if you believe in what you say. And I was increasingly being disaligned. I didn't believe in what I was telling people, the media, but I had to, and it was very, very difficult because then it affects your leadership, your the ability you kind of make people believe in you. How many times can you stand in front of your staff or in front of the media and say these are objectives, we win races, and so on, and it never happens, and it made this project look not credible outside in the media, in the press, and in the public. On the inside, people started to say, well, yeah, we hear the same stuff, but we still don't have money to recruit people, we don't have this to do that, so we're just going to go and do our daily job.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And I mean, it's I can imagine how frustrating that was. It has always looked to me that the ambition of Renault was not matched by their commitment to do what's necessary to compete at the front in Formula One. So I have a final question. I can't believe we're running out of time. I have a final question for you, Marcin. So, and especially having just listened to you talk about the Renault Alpine experience. Next year in Formula One, we have two car companies coming in. One is Audi, and that's with an existing team with the Sauber organization. And then we have Cadillac coming in with a brand new team. If you were to sit in front of the bosses of those two programs and give them a piece of advice, what would it be? Because the one thing that we all know for sure is that when car companies come into Formula One, they have these huge ambitions and these. It's great that they do. It's great to have ambition. But what would you say to them about what needs to be done to be successful in Formula One? Because it's not easy.
I'll tell them it's going to be painful for a little while,
Yeah.
and because what they're trying to do. I mean, Audi obviously is buying a team that is existing, that is a great team, but with some infrastructure deficits, and some underinvestment over the years, with a geographical location which is complicated also to operate a Formula One team for cost of life and tax reasons, but also for livelihood reasons to convince people to move to Switzerland. Cadillac is actually a bunch of people from Enstone being there, and it's run by Graham Loden, who I like a lot and I respect a lot. So I think there's a lot of good things being done there. They're not starting with a new engine, but they're starting for a team from scratch, which is insanely difficult to do and to build. So I can only imagine how hard they're working now and how challenging it is. But the reality is, you need stability. That's one core thing. That's one thing that companies don't always understand. They tend to want to run F1 teams like other businesses, and they move people around all the time and change people in key position. It doesn't work in Formula One. You have to give someone the keys, give them 3 years. If it doesn't work, change them. So stability, support from the big company, whether it's Audi or GM, support that is political, support that is financial, unwavering support, and time, and the reality is it will take time for them to be competitive. You can always have some good surprises, but what happens usually is, the reality is if Audi does a poor engine, for whether it's performance wise or reliability wise, with the restriction on engine rules, it's going to take 3 or 4 years to sort it. Will Audi accept to stay 3 or 4 years in Formula One, being potentially, humiliated? I mean, it's an excessive word, but not looking great every weekend on the track? I don't think so. So there's a risk there. Cadillac is a bit different because it's, GM is the umbrella is GM, but the investment in is private, and it's some investment funds, and so I think they have a much better chance. But these guys will, it will be tough, it will be difficult, and I think they can make it, but most of the time what happens is people on the top, especially in these big car companies, they become impatient, and they become impatient very quickly, and then they start to meddle, and then they start to cut money, cut budgets, or want to place their people, and that's the beginning of the end. And I've seen that a lot at Renault. We've seen this with Toyota. The story of manufacturing involvements in Formula One is full of these stories. And one notable exception, I think, is Mercedes, and because of Toto, because of Niki, I think there's a lot to be said about how much trust the board of Mercedes had in Niki Lauda, and how much that allowed Toto to operate the team more independently, and because of the ownership structure now. But it's the exception that confirms the rule almost.
Marcin, I could talk to you all day. I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us on this episode of The Business of Winning. A real pleasure to talk to you. I hope we speak to you again soon. And thanks very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the season commentating. I know you commentate on Formula One in Poland, and thank you very much again.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about performance insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.